Hey, it's Drybear. Today I want to talk about Hellblade 2: Senua's Saga, and in my opinion it is a game that is far better than you think, and I'm a little heartbroken to see that not everyone is loving it all that much. Right now it's currently at very positive on Steam. It started at 89% yesterday, but it's at 87% of the user reviews for this game are positive. So I wanted to dive into this. We finished it yesterday. If you wanted to watch a playthrough of the game, I have it up on my gameplay channel, which you'll find linked down below. And I think there's definitely a conversation to like several different topics to cover when we talk about a game like this, which in my opinion is a game for impact, for awareness, but also a game that is primarily meant as art. Like, this is a game that is an expression. It is cinema. It's very kino. And then there's going to be people that come at this with a viewpoint of, you know, being more on the side of, I want this to be gamified. I want this to be real gameplay. I want to have an experience that's more game rather than more look around and walk around. So I think if I were to give it a short review summary for the people that just want the overview, I would say this is a game that if you can enjoy looking, like just being there as part of the experience and walking around and seeing the world and being in awe of the graphics and the look and the atmosphere, and you are okay with the gimmick of the pseudo reality and the differentiation of reality for the game and the gimmick of the talking voices, then you're gonna love this game. But if that gimmick doesn't work for you, or you need something more than just atmosphere, then this game may not be for you. Now, it's always hard to make a sequel for anything. I think especially when you have a game that's very much loved. So the first game came out in 2017. It was very loved. A lot of people really liked the first game and what it represented and what it showed, the experience that you had. The idea of the first game was that the main character was suffering from many levels of mental challenges, mental health issues. The primary one being schizophrenia, so having multiple personalities, having separate voices, paranoia that comes from that, and also the idea that she's not really sure how to differentiate reality. So she has all these different disorders and all these different representations of reality. And part of what made the first game special was you were never really sure what was real and what wasn't, because how much of what she was seeing was actually in reality in front of her, and how much of it was just the creations of her own mind and the dark corners of her psyche creating those images, and you were never really sure. So that was kind of like the special little box that Hellblade 1: Senua's Sacrifice got played into, and I think that created a really awesome experience that was unique among its kind of narrative, or you can call them walking simulator kind of games. Now, if we look back at Hellblade 1 on Steam, it has almost 60,000 total reviews, and it's sitting at about the same percentage, between 87 and 90%, very positive, but not quite overwhelmingly positive, so it hasn't crossed that threshold yet. And again, I think that this is going to be more of a niche thing. This game itself was about 6.5 hours, 7 hours, and the new game was also 6.5, 7 hours. But you can even see on the reviews for Senua's Saga, people were funding it. The combat is not what they were expecting. The experience wasn't very good. And I was actually watching a lot of playthroughs of the game with people reacting to the game as well. A lot of people saying that they were being exhausted by the voices in the game, or the pacing of the game was way too slow. How you were just kind of wandering through the atmosphere and the world, trying to figure out what was going on. So let's dive into a couple of these and see what people are stuck on, because there's definitely some honest points here. The biggest presentation is the biggest value. I think everyone agrees that the graphics in Hellblade 2 are actually phenomenal. I can't remember, actually I can. The last game that gave me the same awestruck feeling visually that Hellblade 2 gave me throughout the playthrough was in 2020 with Ghost of Tsushima. And ever since then, even playing games like Cyberpunk and the new expansion, Phantom Liberty, some games that just look visually beautiful, none of them really had the same kind of beauty that Hellblade had since Ghost of Tsushima. And before that, I can't even remember the last game that gave me that same feeling of just looking at the game and really being in awe about the visual representation. And honestly, in many of the places, like in a dark cave or out on a landscape or over a cliff, you weren't looking at a lot of vibrant colors. There wasn't a wide array of colors. It was just very rich textures and really well implemented lighting, refractions and reflections, and all of that. Like, the specularity was just perfect. Everything, like, I could just stare at that game. I need like a moving wallpaper for Hellblade 2, which really makes it just absolutely stunning to look at. So I don't think that the graphics are something that I've never seen anyone say anything bad about it. Not that they can't, but I think that that's an easy win for them. And they actually did mention that during the development of the second game that they did actually focus primarily on the visual representation of the game, making it as good as it can be. And I hope that this doesn't lead to Ninja Theory being closed so that they don't make any more games, because I think Ninja Theory is great. Even if they wanted to do like, I don't know, a remake of what was it, Heaven's Blade or whatever, I think there's definitely some really cool options for them. And if they even if they just make the rest of their games for the next 5 or 10 years look as good as Hellblade 2 does, then I think they're going to be just fine as far as being competitive. And I see this comment a lot: the combat is worse somehow, and I think this is definitely a valid point, because there actually is less general combat than there was in the first game. In the first game, you were able to do attack combos, right? So you could do, I mean, it's a basic three-dimensional action game. You have a light attack, a heavy attack, you have a dodge, and then you can move around and things like that. And based on how you moved through your light and heavies, kind of like Monster Hunter or basic fighting games, you can create combos and weave together hits that allow you to create your own play style. Because based on, you know, if you did 2 lights into a heavy, or 2 lights, pause, and then into a heavy, it's something different. And you were able to do a lot with that in the first game and create a whole bunch of different move styles. Whereas in the second game, they actually brought that down in complexity quite a bit. It kind of simplified the combat. When you are inside of your special superpower, your Iron Mirror power in the second game, it did allow you to create lots of combos, but again, it's a limited time window. So you actually ended up with, I think, simpler combat. They did add a parry in the second game, which was a nice touch, but overall the combat, if you're looking for gameplay, it definitely did feel like a step down from the first game. And you're gonna see this a lot. It's like as if they cut out all the gameplay so there couldn't be any dissonance. I am particularly annoyed at Hellblade 2's gameplay because they see so much potential in it. And I think this is a big part of it too. Now, on the flip side, the artistic representation of the combat was, I think, a really big achievement, because what they did is they created, honestly, if you're just watching the game being played, I think for most people that aren't like, that play games all the time, it's going to be hard for them to differentiate what's gameplay and what's not. I think if you're just watching and you're not controlling the characters, it's hard to differentiate. Like, it almost feels like the entire game was a cutscene. And a lot of the combat itself felt like it was choreographed cutscenes from a movie with someone on set directing it, because it was so integrated into the visuals. And they did an awesome job of creating transitions in the combat between attackers. It at first seems like it's purely scripted, but it's actually quite dynamic. You can, you know, based on how you take out your current target is how the camera will transition to the next target. You'll have people come off camera and bump you or shove you, and you have a chance to save them with a quick time event that isn't really shown as a UI element. You just show that character. Like, you can actually save characters or lose characters based on how you react in the moment, and their momentum and everything shifts through. So I actually got a nice adrenaline rush from the combat itself, even playing on the hardest difficulty, not because it was difficult, like it didn't really challenge me in any way, but I was just, with the music and the atmosphere and the momentum of the fight and how gritty it was, it definitely was a more positive experience there, but it certainly was less of a gamified combat presentation than it was in the first game, and a lot of people are picking up on that. I see a lot of people saying that the puzzles were very straightforward, and I think that's another negative for the second game for sure. One of the things that I really liked about the first game, and in puzzle games in general, now granted, I kind of put this with a grain of salt because I play games all the time, so I'm obviously not the target audience for most games. I mean, very rarely am I the target audience for most games in general, because I'm a little bit more on the hardcore side. But yeah, I would say that the puzzles in the second game were a lot more straightforward than the first game. I wish they had, I mean, they had difficulty settings for the combat. Usually in games like this, they can have a difficulty setting for the puzzles as well. It does mean more dev time, because you have to create systems that swap between them, and also, you know, make sure that those have different content levels that work that way. But there's a couple times in the first game where I genuinely didn't know what it was that I was supposed to do. It was complicated enough where it would give me pause, and I would have to think about, what am I going to do next? What's going on? The first one that comes to mind is the puzzle, or the maze room in the first game, like halfway through when you start getting chased by the goo monster, and you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. Like, you're just being chased. You don't know if you can beat this thing. You can't fight it. The maze has no direction in it. You don't know where you're going. You're scared. It's almost like having a panic attack, being thrust into a puzzle. And it was really, really good. Whereas I didn't really ever feel like that in any of the puzzles in the second game. It was just like, oh, okay, I got to go up there and I got to grab that and put that there, and I got to get this bridge and make that bridge appear, and I go over there and I can turn it in, and the puzzle's solved. And this is probably the biggest critique for people that either refunded the game or didn't finish, or were watching it being played by their favorite content creator or whatever, is it just feels like it is a movie that guides you through everything. And this is something that came up in our conversations about the game while we were playing it, and today as well, from someone in chat, is the idea that the voices for the main character, the idea that they're, the secondary voices that this schizophrenic woman is experiencing are a little overbearing, kind of in your face. Sometimes they spoil things, or sometimes they interrupt things, or they're just constantly yapping, like it's just pure yapping. And this, I think, is probably the most accurate representation of the controversy around whether Hellblade 2 is a good game or not, because in general, I think their purpose, their goal with the multiple voices for Senua, just like it was in the first game, is to, as closely as possible, represent a severe schizophrenic episode where you're having these kind of hallucinations, these different experiences, sounds, any sensory disruptions that can come, and the fact that when you are, I imagine if you're to that level of schizophrenia, the voices are going to be overbearing, disruptive, very hard to deal with. It's like a peanut gallery sitting there all the time, and they're constantly just yapping. So I think their point was to make it feel that way, to feel like the voices just won't shut up and they won't go away, but for somehow you have to get through it, get past it, and keep moving forward. And Senua has to kind of internalize that, right? Like, if she is hearing these voices, she knows that the other people can't hear the voices. So not only is she having the conversation within her own mind, she's also having the conversation outside of her physical self. And if she ever responds directly to one of the voices, then that, lets other people on to the fact that she's got something else going on. So she has to let these voices happen and ignore them and only respond to the people that are in front of her, which makes the whole experience of her. And I think that's why this game qualifies as a game for impact, because it means that it brings awareness to what some people that face psychosis, schizophrenia, paranoia, PTSD, all of these different conditions, what they experience and how they go through life and what they might have to deal with. I mean, especially if you're having not just auditory hallucinations, but if you're having visual hallucinations as well, there's definitely times where Senua isn't sure if what she's seeing is real or not, and she's not sure if she can actually react to it or not, or if the people around her are going to know that she's seeing something, right? And I think that's definitely a very big point of anxiety for people that have these sort of conditions or are in these kinds of states. At the end of the day, it is still a video game. So whether they wanted that to be an impact point controversially or socially or not, and then they still put it in the game, how far do you go to the extent of it being a game for impact and raising awareness for something versus just plain being irritating for people that want to enjoy the game? How do you cross that line, right? If you're too easy on it, no one's going to get the message. If you're too hard on it, the people that should have, experienced it and had their eyes opened may just turn off completely because they can't handle it. The next thing to talk about is the evolution of the story presentation for Hellblade 2, because they did make a very major change in Senua's Saga that didn't exist in Senua's Sacrifice, the first game, and that is the idea that everything in Hellblade 1 was or could have been a machination of Senua's mind, right? There weren't other people. She was always alone. Everything was some distortion or some beacon of light or some shadow or some monster, right? She wasn't like interacting with real people at any point. However, in the second game, that's not the case. They stepped forward outside of her own mind, and now throughout the course of Hellblade 2, she's meeting people, she's talking to them, she's going from town to town. And so, some of what she's interacting with, it would be very hard to argue that that's just in her own head and not something that she's actually seeing, because most part, these are people with cultures and societies and camps and tribes, and they work together and they talk together, and they're fully fleshed personalities, and they have situations, and they enter into the fight with her, and they get injured and they die and all of that. So that kind of steps away from what I think is a little bit of the magic of the first game, and that you're not really sure what's real and what's not, because now she's talking to real people and she's interacting with them in the second game. But I think because of those interactions with other people, it also lent itself to a more relatable message, in that you can see like physically, emotionally, and spiritually, you can see how it affects Senua to come and see other people, right? She obviously feels guilt for having brought her burdens along to other people, and whether or not the Draugr are actually real or the giants are actually real, it's still, she has that kind of, and I think that happens for a lot of people that have these kinds of conditions where they actually feel like they are a burden on other people, that their presence is going to make someone else's life worse. I mean, that's why a lot of them do end up isolating, because they don't feel like they want to have that spill over, like their personal internal hell spill over into other people's lives and damage them or harm them or ruin them. And I think by having other people, she definitely was able to go through that. She went through things like survivor's guilt when she was around and other people died, and she started breaking down. And there's definitely allowed for more relatable emotional moments for Senua in the second game. You have people saying like too short, expensive, easy puzzles. I like the story and the graphics though. Also, there was a strong message throughout the game that, they kept saying that every monster used to be a human. And the message was that they basically had created a hell in their own mind, and that hell was then spilling out into the world. And that's kind of where every monster that she faced, and there was actually like a relatable level of sympathy for the monsters as well, because some of them, they, not to spoil the characters, but they had something traumatic happen to them, and then because of that and how they reacted to it, it created the monster that they became. And whether they were at fault or not for the experience that they had or what they did, it still definitely got into it. But I think that this is probably the best way to put it, is that it is definitely a game that's not for everyone. And I actually would definitely put it in that position where I feel like this is more of a work of art. It is definitely a cinema kind of kino experience that's meant to be more visually stimulating, emotionally stimulating, and more about the atmosphere and what you think about it afterwards, rather than just being a game. And I think it's hard for a game to be marketed just that way. So the next conversation topic, I think, is whether or not there's a place for games like this, because there's definitely a situation, I talked about this last week as well, there's definitely a risk for Ninja Theory to be shut down like some of the other studios that Microsoft has been shutting down over the last couple weeks after this game. If it's a lukewarm reception, it's very possible that we'll lose Ninja Theory as one of the developers that makes games that we enjoy, just because of the way that this game came out. And there's a question of whether or not it is worthy of being on the docket for release, and if there's a place for games as a work of art, because realistically, games as a work of art generally do not make their money back. I mean, I guess most art is that way anyway, unless you're supremely lucky. But most art, games made as an art piece don't make their money back. It's a money loss, and are not positively, as far as mass populace, mass population, aren't applauded or lauded as much as other games, because not everyone can sit for 6 hours straight and just like a kid in a candy store, look around at the graphics and listen to the voices and feel like they're it's almost like you're on a theme park ride where you're on rails and the cart is just driving you through the different scenes and areas. But I think visually the game is awesome. The story is very evocative and very representative, and I think it's a really great position. But I have a feeling that they may not make their money back for this game, and that also puts them on the chopping block for being closed down as a studio, even though I think Ninja Theory makes awesome, amazing games. So let me know what you think about the game. I know some people didn't even play it or saw it for a little bit and wrote it off, but some people really, really did enjoy it. You have people that are putting it as a very high score, very high rating, and in general, it does have a positive reception reception. I think a lot of people liked it, but there's also a lot of people that just didn't like it or were not interested in the first place. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.